Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to celebrate Nicolas Party Red Forest, the artist's first solo exhibition in Hong Kong. Today we have joining us Nicolas Party in New York and Aaina Bhargava, the arts and culture editor for Tatler Asia in Hong Kong, to discuss the latest exhibition. A note before we begin, the event is closed captioned. To use this function, please click the icon at the bottom of the screen. And at the end of the talk, we will have a Q&A discussion. Please feel free to submit your questions at any point during the talk. I now hand this over to Nicolas and Aaina.
Thanks, Yang.
Thank you.
Hi, Nicolas. Congratulations on such a beautiful show, first of all.
Thank you. Hello.
So I think it'd be a great place to start with, how was the idea for the show conceived? What specifically inspired you to approach the human and nature relationship through focusing on the different natural elements?
Yes. So yeah, I think every show's starts with different ideas, and I think I always kind of think the show is you obviously in the middle of all the project and the process. And I think for me, this show was very connected to the one that I just was finishing in Montreal, L'Heure Mauve, where I did this first pastel of the red forest, which kind of is a forest fire. And in this show, there was a lot of conversation between historical artwork and painting and our relationship to nature. And I think those basically forest fire was one of the starting points of the show in Hong Kong. And I really wanted to have a room with free of those red forests pastel together. And I think from there, I started to do those kind of almost as an opposition, the kind of water reflection clouds kind of painting. That's kind of actually originally they were supposed to be all in different. Each room had the portraits, the clouds, and the fire. But then I mixed up the clouds and the portraits together. And I think the four portraits came kind of at the end, and it's the idea of the elements and our kind of relationship to nature and the environments, and what is nature and what is human, and also the idea of how different cultures and philosophical idea have been trying to define those elements of nature, and how everything is kind of interconnected. Came kind of towards and I guess through the process, and it's how I chose basically the series of portraits to me made out of those kind of meteorites, which are kind of the element of kind of metal that is specific to kind of the Chinese kind of elements. Also, I guess the wood is another one that is not in the Western traditional kind of four elements, and it's kind of course echoes the fire kind of landscapes.
Well, the fire is burning the wood, so maybe there is no wood.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. But speaking of the Red Forest series, for those who haven't seen the exhibition yet, because I've actually been it's quite an intense. It's quite an intense atmosphere that I think with the red of the walls are painted red, and then it's the colors in your paintings are so intense as well that you kind of feel like you're on fire a little bit, or it's quite a visceral. There's definitely a visceral reaction that you feel. And this series is a very new aesthetic for you as far as landscape painting is concerned. Which there's also in comparison to the paintings which are upstairs, that contrast is even more jarring for how new it is for you. And like you said, it was inspired by the California wildfires and the colors of mauve twilight. But what was it, I'm curious, that you were seeking to explore through experimenting with this new aesthetic?
I think what happened is, again, in the show in Montreal, I wanted to have I was basically working on a room with like different kind of 1600s Dutch painting, which represented like Sodom and Gomorrah, and like I think there was two painting of that representation where fire is, you know, like is when God is punishing humans, and usually actually using fire or flood. That's his two most common way of. So they're obviously very related to kind of natural disaster. Anyway, there's quite a lot of representation of fire, and I was like seeing obviously like in the last like, you know, decade or so, like the overpresence of those fire every year. I mean, more or less everywhere in the world. And I kind of wanted to explore the idea of like how to try to represent it, and I quite quickly I thought, oh, maybe there should be a little bit more realistic, for the lack of word, because kind of my landscapes are often like really not connected to real landscapes or real trees. Those are like clearly like have like a, you know, like a almost recognizable type of trees, and it kind of echoes, yeah, like kind of more like a northern kind of American landscape because of the type of trees and the type of kind of, yeah, iconography. And I think because I started to, basically the starting point was different kind of photos of forest fire. I think like the results is slightly more realistic. I mean, it echoes a little bit more of a real kind of landscape in a way. And I think the also what happened is that how I worked it became very different because it's way less flat and like graphic, because I was starting looking at photos, and photos are, you know, like much more blurry. Which is kind of always interesting to remember that photos is very connected to the impressionist and pointillist, and because photos is really not graphic, and there's no clear line, everything is more or less blurry. And it's more like by looking at photos that painters started to basically explore like the blurriness and like the pointillist and post-impressionist. And I was always actually very attracted to it. And it's kind of interesting that those kind of photos and those subjects made me explore that more, like kind of, you can see a lot of dots and little like, you know, there's less kind of like straight lines. And actually I wanted to explore that for a long time, and those kind of subjects really kind of allowed me to do it. And so now I'm actually like trying to also have this style in the different landscape, but that's it's another story. But yeah, they're very new, and I'm very excited to share them. I really wish, obviously, I could see them in that room.
Yeah, it's quite like I said, it's a very visceral experience. Which is not always common with painting. So that was like, I think it's like a nice new experience for whoever hasn't seen the show yet. But I just wanted to move on to your portraits as well. So the new portraits for the show sort of, you know, we've seen them obviously in the images and in the video as well. They depict human bust-like figures, which are almost coming out of meteorites. And I know they're also supposed to resemble Chinese scholars' rocks and other rock formations. But they, like, to me, they really serve as like visual metaphors for man and nature either merging or diverging, depending on how, you know, how you're looking at that relationship. But through these portraits, how do you see the relationship between man and nature evolving?
Yeah, that's so yeah, those portraits are, yeah, like you see like just the face and the body or the torso is kind of made out, but you don't really know if it's hiding or if it's the actual body that is kind of like made out of this kind of meteorite. And it's true that you can either see something that is like kind of like struggling and like kind of basically making all your inside like trying to move and like kind of burning, and there's something interesting about, because all the scholar rocks that are very present in China, like the carving of those shapes are made out by usually water, like it's kind of sandstone and that are carved by water. And the meteorites, it does a similar effect, but what's interesting is it's made out with I guess the fire, like melted when they go through the atmosphere. So they like they have a similar carving, but with a very different element, and they're coming obviously from another part of the universe, which I always thought I think it's very poetic. I mean, I think our relationship to, I think we always had like probably a very complex relationship to the environment, since we maybe are aware that either we separated from it, as we feel like we separated from it, as we probably like realized a long time ago that there was a difference between humans, our kind of species of animals, and the other ones. And since then, there's been a constant conflict of either trying to kind of, like own nature and kind of basically kind of made nature to what we want. And another part being like, are we part of it and we need to be in harmony with it? And those two kind of, I mean, those two energies are very kind of conflictual, because in a way we are taking over and destroying the environment around us. And in the same way, we constantly feel like we have this lost relationship to nature that we probably never had. But it's like that was for in Western culture, like the idea of the paradise is kind of the Garden of Eden is basically like when there was no humans on the planet. So like the idea, like what is the perfect world is basically a world without human. It's what we promised to go back when we realize, oh, it's going to be like basically what it looks like before Adam and Eve, before they started to fool around and being human. And it's a very interesting idea, because it's still like in the 20th century, probably the idea of the park and like how to preserve nature. It's exactly like, let's try to basically have those environment where nature is not touched by human, and that will be basically like what the world is supposed to be without us. And all those kind of different interaction and relationship with nature are, I mean, obviously they're not very solvable, because
Right.
it's too complicated. But I think nowadays, obviously, like there's we live, we have no idea where we're going, but we live in a time that the anxiety, and I think the split between the culture and nature, and human and nature, is definitely at a very high peak. Almost like probably everybody will say, oh yeah, there's definitely something wrong going on, and I don't think like we're going to the right direction. And that was obviously not always the case, to be so like generally almost all around the world saying like, oh yeah, like our relationship with nature is broken right now, and we kind of have to do things here and there. I mean, we'll see what's what's happened. The thing is, like, as many of us know, then it's like nature is obviously much stronger and more powerful than humans. So we can always feel like, oh, we're going to change it, we're going to like manage it, but the nature itself will manage us more than the opposites.
Yeah, that's actually two really interesting points that you touched on, because I think another interpretation or another feeling that, people could possibly get from looking at the portraits is like this feeling of immobility and being stuck or frozen. Because like the way the meteorites are like warped around the bust, it's like, it's just very structured, and it's very like grounding almost. So I think it's sort of, that's why to me, it was really a visual metaphor for like our relationship with nature, which just seems to be kind of like stuck in this like weird limbo, which you very eloquently sort of described. I don't know if that
that's a great that's a great point. I really like the idea of those characters kind of being like stuck, because it's true, like the meteorites will have a shape, and they will go through the earth, it will change very rapidly, and then it will be like, like drop into the ground like us, and be like stuck and be like, hey. For the rest of time.
And also, just out of curiosity, was like our sort of like, there's this definitely this current, human obsession with space and, colonizing Mars. Was that all like a factor in this, or am I just reading too much into it?
No, I mean, it's I mean, when I use an element like the idea of the meteorites, right. I'm embracing whatever comes with it, because I know it's a very charged symbolic kind of object, because it's out of space, and it evokes so much about basically our relationship with what is what is the universe, what is the outspace, what is the planets, is this life out there? And when I, like it's same with like fire, or like when I do a sunset, I'm not like shy, or like I just I'm taking it all in, and then whatever, because everybody will have a different relationship with meteorites, and like, oh yeah, I just read this book, or I just watched that movie, or like, oh, I just have one, or like when I was a kid, like, and that is all like about, like, again, like when you do art and painting, I think most artists, what they want is to have the viewer to basically like, get in this room that you create with the painting, right, and fill, whatever they want with their own life and own kind of reference and knowledge.
Well, I guess it's just another way to cope with an existential crisis that we're all having. So
yeah, I mean, the in the that was, like the and it's also a very common kind of apocalyptic, but especially in recent years, in a lot of movies, and actually like the movie that the director was, but with all the stars, like Don't Look Up, that was last winter with Leo Caprio, and like
right,
they were like talking about the global warming crisis, but they did put basically it was an asteroid like coming to Earth, and it's been like a fairly common in the last like 40 years. There's many movies that to talk about the apocalypse and like the end of the planet, they talk about basically like something that is coming from out of space as a metaphor of like the problem is more inside you, and that's maybe like the idea of the portrait. It's like it's almost like more like a psychological problem.
Absolutely. And just another question about the portraits. So typically the figures, they're said to be androgynous and are sometimes based on people that I was just curious, is this true for any of the portraits in the show or in general? How do you sort of conceive the actual figures in these portraits?
So yeah, most of my portraits are not based on anybody that that exists. Like same with the landscape, basically. Like they're like really kind of I describe them as an ideal idea of like a portrait or figure that is loosely based on like kind of the Western kind of Greek idea of like of beauty that was basically not. It's only the Roman that brings the like the kind of defined characters, like they kind of not invent, but they like come up with, some of the artists come as, oh, we should actually represent people. The sculptures should actually look like, like the emperor or whatever. Like the Greeks were not really doing that. There was like, most of the faces are very similar. They're like, oh, that's an ideal idea of a face. And that's ideal, design of a face is kind of fascinating, because obviously it doesn't exist, and we're still very haunted by it today, because like we never really left that idea that what we look like is not what we want to represent, or what we want to look at in image making, and with photography and this big kind of age of digital, and the filters and Instagram and plastic surgery, there's another like huge kind of a wave of the ideal face is definitely not the one that that exists, and it's quite often it's quite a similar face that is actually quite androgenic, and that has like a kind of an age that is like like I guess in the 20s or something like that, but also that could look like older and younger in the same time. It's like this kind of this lost in space kind of idea of a person that doesn't exist. That again, I've been looking at quite a lot of the kind of the aesthetic of Greek sculptures that is recalled and toward Western history quite a lot. But again, there also definitely echoes in my sculptures a little bit more of that like idea of the digital age and the kind of filter versions of ourselves that look more and more like a person that doesn't exist, as maybe as beauty as an idea or the concept is something that's always should be not like what exists, because what's the point if it exists? It doesn't make us maybe like dream or something. I don't know.
Right. And I think that, but that also, like, that idea of beauty is something that you also touched upon when, when you were talking about earlier in the video about why you use pastels and why pastels is so, fascinating to you. And just to sort of use that as a point of departure into my next question, how important is materiality to you as a painter? And because there has been a lot of, sort of comment on how it's a really unusual choice for contemporary painters to use pastels. So why, I'm just curious, why pastels? And then could you just expand a little bit more about why, you think they're historically important, and, or rather the implications of using pastels is so important?
Yeah, I mean, so I started to use soft pastel, like a little bit by accident. I just, like discovered it. I mean, I knew it existed, but I started to use it a little bit by accident, like almost 10 years ago. And what happened is that I really, had like a big kind of epiphany with with using it, because it suited me like directly. It was basically like one of the main thing. It was much more like immediate and a little bit fast and more like kind of tactile, that oil painting. And I was having like a lot of problem with painting with oil or acrylic at that point. So when I discovered, and it's so different to work with, because you work with your finger, you have all those different colors. It's very powdery and very sensual. The texture is very different. So somehow, like, anyway, it worked for me, and I was really like kind of fell in love from the get-go. And I think after that, as I often kind of talked about, I discovered the specific kind of history and why, like, there's very little pastel nowadays, and there was a lot in the 1700s. And as you kind of like talked a little bit about, like, how like the very like kind of close relationship that pastel had with portraiture, and especially makeup and gender in the 1700s. When I started to do it, the story is that when I started to do pastel, I started to do portrait, and I was not doing any portraits at the time. So it was somehow like the medium kind of led me to do portraits. And the first thing that I did in the first portrait that I did was to put like high shadows and lipstick, probably because again the medium was telling me to do this in myself. I wanted to explore that with my work, and it's only like really like almost a year later that I discovered, like, that's the pastel as a medium in the 1700s was so kind of connected to makeup, and people were wearing a lot of makeup. The pastel manufacturers was actually the same one that were doing, making the makeup. So you could actually go buy pastel and makeup in the same shop. And as I described in the video, when you will paint a portrait of someone, the person will literally be covered with pastel. So it will be painting a painting. So there's something kind of very kind of fascinating about it. And then obviously kind of it vanished after the French Revolution, because it was heavily attached to like a society that was very not well regarded by those kind of very academic, kind of very conservative in many ways, French Revolution, in terms of maybe in political they had like a lot of interesting ideas. Of, well, that's to be debated, but culturally there was a lot of things that they kind of broke down, and especially again the fluidity with gender, and like there was a lot of things happening in the Rococo that was very interesting, that was completely broken down to give the rise of and I always often talk about of the huge presence of women artists because of pastel in the 1700s. But the main figure of pastel is Aaina Bhargava, the Venetian artist. That was like a huge star, but there was like really a tremendous amount of women artists in the 1700s that completely like also vanished because again, this movement was very kind of conservative in the way that broke down. And since then, basically, there's very little pastel in the art world.
If just out of curiosity, if pastel didn't exist, what material would you paint with?
I mean, I do work with a lot of materials. Like I do at the moment work on oil and on copper, very small. But I love watercolors. I mean, if you give me a pencil and a piece of paper, I'll be happy. I just need that, or a piece of charcoal and a cave. I'll be happy to.
All right. So Nicolas Party cave paintings. That's the next cave drawing.
Well,
Next
exactly.
exhibition. No, just kidding. So I have another question, which is again in regards to your portraits, but I was just curious how because you sort of do these like big sculptural busts as well. How does your strategy, or not strategy, but like your approach for portraiture change from painting to sculpture, or does it at all?
They were definitely like the starting point was very similar. I mean, it started with the pastel portraits, and then I was working on different objects. I was painting on stones, and I painted on like stools and tables, and I really liked the presence of basically painted objects in an environment. So then at some point I did, I think the first one that was in Oxford's Modern Art Oxford, this museum that did those series of 5 kind of big sculptures, and they were the first one, and then I came up with a slightly different shape. But the main idea was the sculptures was to basically have a shape that is basically not really a sculpture, that is kind of almost a generic shape of a head that will be taken from a doll or like from a mannequin or like a hat holder kind of objects, and then really paint on it to basically make this kind of painting on an object kind of type of artwork. And the presence was actually quite different because it's actually somehow colder and even less alive than the the pastel. Also because maybe because of it's with oil paint, and it's like something kind of pretty like I really like displaying this. There's no in the show in Hong Kong, and but they're definitely like a part of my practice that I'm happy with, and they kind of bounce back with the portraits in an interesting way.
No, definitely. So what is your creative process like? You've spoken a little bit in the past about how, you know, you liken it to sampling, like the 90s DJing method, which I think is like a fun way to describe it. But could you expand a little bit more about that? And also, do you draw from pre-collected or existing source material?
So yeah, I mean, in the show there's little example of that, but I will say the meteorites are a bit of that, but it's all the meteorites are taken from photos, but all the rest is just like purely from, you know, I guess no real sources. Actually, they fire a little bit, but they're like very loose interpretation of different photo sources. But the meteorites actually like it is like, and when I talk about the sampling, it's more with a lot of the work that I've been doing that uses other arts, especially like historical arts, that I will take a part of it, or, you know, like a corner of a painting, or just one element, and I will just like reproduce it on my painting and make a collage with one of my elements. And I think I use sampling because I love how like you know, electronic music and especially hip hop music in the 90s, late 80s, 90s were absolutely like so unapologetic of just, oh yeah, we like that part of this music, this kind of funk music or whatever like source that they were using. Are we just gonna like take this bit and just do our own kind of song with it? And it's I guess the idea of the postmodern area where you can just the accumulation of sources, at least field, because there was always an accumulation of sources for a long time now, but in any like historical library, like in the 1700, 1800, there was like a huge amount of stuff already. But I think in the I guess in the 60s, 70s, 80s, like there's a because the computer start to arrive, and the amount of access to image and books and TVs like start to be quite overwhelming for society in general. That's, I think there's a natural incline of being like, oh well, there's so many things available. There's no way that we're just gonna like always have this myth of the modern idea that, oh, we need to create a new style, like a new aesthetic, which was obviously a fraud, because most of the modern aesthetic was a sampling of other aesthetic around the world. So it was exactly the same thing. It was very little was like the myth of Picasso creating new aesthetic is him sampling other aesthetic, and he was mostly also very good samplers. But I think it was always like there. But I think there's at least I think nowadays nobody claim, oh, I'm creating a fully new kind of aesthetic out of scratch. It's more like, of course, you're taking reference, and sometimes you're sampling something very, very directly. And in my case, it's very direct. And again, I think like doing a lot of in the 90s, being very active or whatever you in graffiti and hip hop kind of scenes. I think it came very naturally for me, like especially when I was doing murals, because when you were doing street art, like you will very often take, like cartoons from another illustration, and you just do it on the wall. Most of my friends doing graffiti, they were not very good drawers, so they will just take it from a comic book and I'm just going to do this one. And it was not a problem. Nobody was saying like, oh, it's not yours. And like, I don't care, like it looks good. Take it. And I think there's like, I think it's very kind of liberating in a way. And I do use that quite a lot in my work in various ways.
All right. So two questions, just based off of what you said. Do you still feel a lot of pressure now as an artist, as a painter, to even though it's sort of like a tired argument about having to constantly create something original or new, like you said, like, do you still feel that pressure or not so much?
Of like creating something new?
Or original, yeah.
No, I mean, I think like, no,
or
because I think whatever you do is yours. Like, I think I think what is important for any creative people is to just believe, like, as soon as you do something, even if you copy something, it's still yours. And your personality and yourself is unique no matter what. Doesn't mean it's good, but it means it's just unique. So it's like, I think being good is not about, oh, like I need to try my own voice. You have your own voice no matter what. Like it is there. Yeah, I think it's more to embrace it and accept it and be not like shy about it. And if your own voice looks like very similar than other people, it's not a problem at all. It's still your own voice. Like there's not the amount of images that exist in the world is obviously infinite, but they look very similar over the last, like, the way of painting a tree is, of course there's millions of ways, but also like if you look at a tree painted like in Egypt and now, it's not that different. So like what you add yourself is a tiny little thing. It's like, your own voice or your own way of walking or whatever. It's we all do more or less the same, but you have your own way, but it's a tiny little difference. And I think that's don't try, like I will say, I'm not trying to be original or not. I'm just doing what I do, and if people like it, it's great. And if not, if they don't, it's fine too. But it's kind of, I don't think you can really, there's no recipe of like being like, oh yeah, I need to be original. Like you are original by a fact. There's nobody like you. So like nobody can tell you, oh, like it's very similar than this. Again, it's like, what's not? It's me.
Very true. And then also in terms of when you used to do graffiti when you were younger, was your sort of intention or your mindset when you were doing graffiti, how is that different to your like mindset when you paint now, besides having that sort of rebellious and adrenaline inducing attitude?
Yeah, that's the one that is well, that's where I kept doing murals, and also like I often describe the way I do murals in a lot of the different shows that I do. I try to improvise on the site, so I do have a little bit of the adrenaline because I can fail, or like this like lack of material. Like I'm always trying to not be completely prepared when I do a mural in any show. So there's like a moment of like stress or like the timeline or that I kind of kept, and also like working very fast. That is like, but yeah, it is. I mean, the graffiti was a lot about that part of it, the performance. I often describe graffiti more as a performance kind of art or activity than actually a visual. The visual is really secondary in a way, graffiti. Like you, especially like the purest form, which is like the train or like the tag in the streets. It's basically you just have to learn to do something that is quite similar than everybody else in a way. You have 4 letters and you just do them like in a few different colors. What is important is more like where you do it and how often you do it, and this kind of performative, like the danger and how basically it's how visible it is and how difficult it is to get there. And I think it's more like so the style is important, of course, but it's really like as soon as like street art becomes much more like stylish, usually it's legal, like because you need more time and people start to be usually older and and they do those big fresco. And that's kind of, for me, it's different. It's like, of course, it's in the street, so it's like there's like a relationship to an environment. But for me, graffiti was always like illegal, and the performative aspect of it was the main thing. So that is, of course, like I have less I have less of that in the show. But I kept a lot of the very graphic part of graffiti because it has to be very visible from far away, and usually like if it's on the train, for example, like it goes very fast. So I think I kept a lot of those kind of curves and shapes, like in the clouds, for example, some of them that if you see like, especially 90s graffiti, I mean, you probably like, you can definitely make some connection to it.
For sure. And you've also, I mean, you've obviously experimented with a lot of kind of painting, but have managed to create this very distinctive aesthetic. And just having, whether it's like color, form, or perspective, what have you found like the most challenging thing about being a contemporary painter? And what do you do, or what do you think you will do to keep challenging yourself and, further push the boundaries of this very traditional medium?
Yeah, I don't. That's always like a kind of almost like a haunting question, because I do love coming to the studio, and I feel like I'm always having like, that's my favorite place to be, and I love like doing my little sketch, doing my little painting, and I don't feel at the moment I have any problem to come every day and like having at least feeling that I have new avenues and new kind of territories to explore, at least for myself, and I feel excited about it. I feel challenged by it. Of course, like you never know, what's going to happen, and like maybe one day you come to the studio and you just don't want to do it, or like, and I really almost never had that. So I feel very lucky, and I feel that I've been blessed by just be able to just come to the studio and having that energy. I think being a contemporary artist is just having that as much as possible, so you can just work and you can do what you do, and then if it echoes to a larger audience that is like now, like this is something that you can't really decide. This is just and sometimes you do something that will echo later, or you should be echoed before you do it too late, but that doesn't really matter. You can't really choose how much when you write it. In pop music, like it's so like formatted to like please the now audience, and every like people that writes pop music, they want to do a hit like every week, and they have like a lot of formula to it, and you really never know why, like, oh, this one is suddenly becomes super popular. Like I'm thinking about like Billie Eilish when she came with her song like kind of out of nowhere, and like somehow people like, oh, this is it, this is what we want, and no, like you can't really predict that. She did that song with the brother and she didn't know, like she was not like, oh yeah, that's gonna be like everybody's gonna like feel, oh, this is the song of like, I don't know, it was like 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And I think with creation, it's often the case when you can come up with the most like, oh yeah, that's what people want now. They're like, and it's not gonna like mean much. Like you just have to, you do your thing, and if it echoes with a small crowd, it's great. If it echoes with a big crowd, it's great too. But you can't really control that. The only thing you can control, I think, is coming to, if you're a writer, if you're coming to writing studio, and like if you're a painter, like, and having a great time. I mean, great time meaning like that you feel like very fulfilled by the experience of being new space, and probably meaning that at least you have a good time and you think it's interesting, and then like hopefully people, sometimes you don't need that many people to make you survive. Sometimes you do. I mean, pop music, I guess you do a little bit more than in art to kind of survive as a. But I think the main thing again is just to feel challenged and interested by your daily practice, and it's from what I know from different artists, it's not the easiest thing. Some people, they come to the studio and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do, I don't know. And that's when it happens, it's obviously hard and difficult to resolve.
Right. And just another question in regards to your use of color for the show. Like, as we mentioned before, it's very much, based on the elements, and it's reflective of all like the natural elements that you're drawing from. But what usually in your process itself, how is color like secondary to the concept, or is it the other way around usually?
No, it really comes, it's the same. It's just they're all working together. It's like, I guess it's like all the elements, they're all connected, and none of them have more importance than the other. I will say, like, hopefully, like, colors, forms, symbolic and concepts in the painting, they all like have an equal kind of importance in the object, in the experience of the object. Because some people could say, oh, like, what is very important in my work, it's my research and my kind of context or concepts, and then I have a visual mean to basically communicate that concept the best. Or some people can say, like, well, I want to explore like shapes and colors, and I'm going to use like landscape for that, because it's what is in landscape is the best way to, for me, like all the different elements, like you see, like shapes and colors and composition, but also the concept and the symbolism that is in, they're all like that. They all have to be exactly in the same level and balance in the right way for me anyway, to make an interesting art world. None of them has to kind of take over the other one. But I mean, I'm not saying that it's success on each painting that I do, but it's definitely the goal. And so the color is obviously like, I think sometimes people feel that, oh, it's kind of important because it's especially because the walls are in colors. But as I always talk about, like, there's no wall color. Like, using white as a color for a wall is the same as red. I mean, it's the same. It's as colorful as red. It's just more like the symbolism and the historical meaning of white is different than red in a way, and then also different around the world. But so that maybe it feels like a little bit like the color is like more present than other artists. But I think, like, we know, as long as we see the world in colors, it's it's everything is a color. So it's important for everybody.
Right. Oh, just a quick follow-up, and then I think we're going to go to the audience questions. But I heard that white was sort of, you had like I don't know if the correct way of saying it is like this, you have like a particular affinity for it, or you think it's a lot more than just being the absence of color as it's so referred to. Is that correct?
Well, because like what's happening is that because I paint the gallery wall in colors,
right.
People sometimes. Well, what I always point out is, like, if you leave the wall whites, that's mean you painted them. You choose whites as your color, and if you choose, like, for example, in this photo here, like, it's red, and it's very obvious that it does a different effect than if it was whites. But what I disagree with, and what I strongly think is wrong, it's that when people say, like, oh, I didn't paint the wall of the gallery, I just left them white, and you say, oh, why? Like, oh, like, because it's neutral. And that is a culturally and historically wrong idea. Like, if you think that white is neutral, it's just not right. White is not neutral. White is sometimes in Western culture recently the idea of white is neutral, and as you know, and it obviously echoes a lot of different idea of branding white as neutral. But it is a similar thing. It's like white is another color. It's another color with symbolic, with historical kind of meaning, and like, you know, different meaning throughout the so any artist that says like, oh, if I ask any artist, oh, which color you want to put you painting on, and they say like, oh, no, I don't want to have a color, I just like white, so it's neutral. It's like, well, this is just wrong. Like, you can say like, I want my painting to be on white because I think white is a good color because of this and this and this. But if you say white, I use white because it's neutral, it's wrong. It's just plainly wrong. That's my only kind of it's the same thing I was saying, like, oh, I used red because it's very neutral. People say like, well, it's not neutral, I think red is very this and this. White is exactly the same thing. So that's the only thing. If people want to put their painting in on white wall, it's obviously completely fine, and sometimes it works, not often, but sometimes. But they need to be aware that it's not because it's neutral, because that's very like, there's nothing neutral, that doesn't exist. And it's obviously a very interesting idea that every Westerners think that white is neutral. It's the non-colors. It's that very convenient. White is the non-color.
Non-color, yeah.
So all the rest is colored, as it still exists in the US.
That's very true. Okay, I'm going to take questions from the audience now. Okay, so for the first question, it's from an anonymous attendee. Can you tell us more? Well, one of the questions is, what are your favorite paintings of the exhibition and why? Which I'm not sure if you're going to answer, or you're just going to say all of them. So it's like a two-part question. And can you tell us more about your approach towards the installation and presentation, specifically for this exhibition? Why is it important that it becomes an immersive experience?
So yeah, I mean, there's yeah, I can't really say all this. They're all like kind of different, and I mean, they're all different. There's obviously the series, so like there's the three different series. I don't like to call them series, but yeah, I will not be like able to say like which one is my I think like from the cloud, there's one cloud without the I think it's maybe the last one that I did. That is the blue. I think there's no sun basically and I think maybe that's kind of maybe my favorite. But also love I like the landscape that is very pale. But sometimes I will like it because it's sometimes one of my favorite painting will be actually the one that is like giving me like more like a challenge. It doesn't mean it's the most successful one. Sometimes it's more like in my process, I feel like kind of challenged by it. So it's, you know, it's more interesting for me to communicate with it than, but yeah, my connection and my relationship with my painting is very different, because sometimes it's related to when I did it, like, so I can have a like more an emotional relationship to it, because when I did it, something happened, or like, so those things kind of can change. Yeah, I mean, again, like, I think I think it looks more immersive because of the color of the wall, but I think every artist wants to, have a powerful, experience for the visitors to immersive just means like, I think I want the visitors to feel like invited and kind of generously like invited in the environment. And so when you're in it, you kind of locked in a little bit. And so and I think some of the use of the color can be very useful for that, and sometimes change of the architecture of the mural to basically make the viewer really kind of welcomed, but also like kind of a little bit trapped, or like, yeah. So like, kind of that's it is like we live in a world where like obviously like there's much more a full-on experience than being in a show with painting. It's not the most kind of like, movies and like different things are a bit more stronger than this with the music and moving images and sport or whatever. But so like, trying to just make it like still like elegance, but yeah, like kind of inviting and generous for the audience is kind of important.
Fair. Another question is, as far as, it's also from an anonymous person. There's a lot of anonymous questions. As far as I know, you have had studios in Glasgow, Brussels, and New York. How does the environment you live and work in affect the work, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult to know, because I think when you move to a place, you're like in the middle of like whatever series or like painting that you're doing, so like you usually keep doing it, and it's only like years after that you can realize that, oh, that was definitely but for example, I started Pastel when I moved from, I mean, more or less when I moved from Glasgow, like so there was definitely a moment. And then like when I moved from Brussels to New York, I think it was more that because of all the project I was having and working with different galleries, I was able to just expand my studio in terms of space, and becoming much more like ambitious with the size of the studio. That's made me like very able to explore like sizes, and like basically all those kind of practical aspect of the practice became like super like well kind of defined, which was like amazing, because it's, you know, of course, as I said in the beginning, you can have a piece of paper and just a pencil, but sometimes it's a great, you know, and it's very lucky like to be able to do it. But it's also like, it's great for an artist to say, oh, you can do whatever you want now. It's like with, you know, with material and everything, it's very, very exciting. So New York kind of coincident with that a little bit.
Did you start making sculptures when you moved to New York?
No, I was doing in Brussels too. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is like a really fun, quick one. Do you like the ending of the movie Don't Look Up?
Yeah, I mean, well, the ending was very funny. Yeah. Like they're going in this like little planet. I think, yeah, of course they had to end with the planet's kind of ending. There was no other way to do it, and it was, I mean, they had also to end it with the Jeff Bezos team like getting like eaten up by the whatever dinosaurs like on this other planet. Yeah, I think it's actually, yeah, it's really rare to have an apocalyptic movie that actually ends bad. It's right. Kind of I think there was maybe like I mean, I think like I'm thinking about like T2 or like one of the, you know, like Terminator or like the Schwarzenegger. I mean, anyway, there's like a big kind of nuclear apocalypse. I think it's at the end of one of them. But anyway, that was great, because it was like, well, the idea is like, oh, this is happening, and if you deny it in any Hollywood movie, there's always the happy ending, which like in literature, like there's a lot of not happy ending in novels, but in Hollywood it's always happy ending. It's just weird, and very often like adaptation of books will be so different. The ending is so different in a novel than and I think like having a bad ending is also very good. I mean, it's not an happy ending.
Right. You deal with issues of sustainability in your work. Do you ever consider the sustainability of the materials you create art with? If yes, in what ways? It's from Kate Nicholson.
I mean, sustainability depends what it means, and like in terms of like, oh, I want to have the object kind of survive like, you know, a very expanded, you know, time. But the funny thing is, like nowadays we feel like we're not gonna, humans not gonna be there for too long. So maybe that's, we're not in the you know, when Egyptian were like conceiving art, and we're like, well, we're gonna be here forever in our like civilization, and they did stay like their silent civilization for quite a few thousand years. So they were pretty right. But now, like, it's true that it feels like everything that is made is, you know, is kind of almost known to kind of basically, you know, be obsolete after like a year or two. So it's really like, you know, we're not building cathedral anymore. Like we feel like we're building things that's, oh, we know we're going to destroy like, you know, 2 days later. And so like, I don't know, like in terms of arts making, I think you still like, because we use material and like technique that are so old very often, and most of the artists do anyway. Like, so when you do painting, you use canvas or wood it is the same thing that was used hundreds of years ago. So like you assume that if we stay around for another few hundred years, it will be there. In terms of like more like kind of having a practice that takes like all those issues in conservation with shipment and everything, it is like, I think it's a debate in the art world that is like quite present, and is like different organization and Hauser they started this too, and different studios of how like to become more like having less of a carbon print kind of numbers and everything. It is kind of a very interesting debate, because art could be anywhere like an image or a metaphor of what could become. Of course, it's not the art world that is really responsible for a lot of it's like a tiny little industry, if a very like minuscule industry compared to most of industries. So it's not like the art shipment that is really making like if you remove it, it's not going to make a dent in the shipment industry. But I think it's very interesting to explore, because art was always like a little pocket of ideas, and like any kind of art form that sometimes can lead other much bigger companies with, oh yeah, that's interesting. So I think it's very interesting to explore all those different ideas.
Great. And last question, because a couple of people have asked this, but since it's your first solo exhibition in Hong Kong, what did you enjoy the most about having the opportunity to show your work here, and what do you hope local audiences will take away from it?
Well, first of all, I'm very sad to not be there.
Yeah.
Because I went there twice and I loved it very much. Like I think a lot of people love Hong Kong. It's like such a unique and amazing city. So it's kind of strange for me to do a show there. Hopefully I'll do another one soon, and I can go back there. But no, I mean it's what you want from the audience is to, I think like what I'm always hoping for, that different type of audience will all find something to take from whatever I'm doing. So like I'm doing art with my own kind of life and experience, and of course when it's put out, like there's every person that comes with it will see it with their own experience, references, whatever movies or book they just read, or like whatever love story they have at the moment. And that obviously I can't control. The only thing that I'm hoping is that the show and the paintings are inviting, and so people can get into those paintings and then basically like find themselves whatever it is. It's great for me. Like I always feel like like every talking to the Billie Eilish song or whatever, like everybody that listened to it when it comes out or whatever, like it's different. Some people will have a broken heart, some people will be depressed, some people will be just walking out, and like but somehow it feels like everybody is like, oh yeah, great, I love the song, but for very different reasons and different kind of set. And hopefully like a painting is, and I think all the paintings that I have around me, like from other artists, like I have the same thing. One day I look at it in a very different way, and hopefully those things are like changing. And as I think what you want as an artist is to create an object that is as open and rich as possible, so they can go through time, people, and still have like something to say, basically.
Right. And I'm sure it will.
Hopefully.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. It was so great talking to you. It was like very informative and lovely discussion. I'm gonna hand it back.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dana. It was really great to speak to you too. I had a great time.
I'm gonna hand it back over to Ying now.
Hi, thank you both for the discussion. Nicolas Party Red Forest is on view at Hauser Wirth Hong Kong until September 24th. And thank you everyone for joining today. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.